Welcome to Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future. We are at the International Leadership Association Conference in Geneva, Switzerland. Today we're going to be talking to Leah Lizarondo about reimagining leadership to solve food insecurity. So Leah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Maureen.
Tell our listeners a little bit about you. How did you get here? What's your background?
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines.
Okay.
And when I was 16, I saw this National Geographic with New York City in it. And I told myself one day I'm going to live there. Fast forward a few years later, less than a decade, I did move to New York City. I had this kind of view of the United States from a country where poverty is endemic, the Philippines, as this utopia, as it's painted in many of the movies I watched when I was a kid. But one thing that happened while I was living there, slowly you see signs and you realize that there's two worlds here in America. There's privileged and there's poverty. But the difference between poverty here and poverty in the Philippines is that it's hidden here. Not quite so obvious, but exists so distinctly. And that kind of realization, through the years was just really changing the way I perceive the country that I choose to live in. And got to where I am now because in 2012, I read this report from the National Resources Defense Council. It was called Wasted. That was the first report that spread the awareness that we are wasting almost half our food supply, up to 40%. And I thought in a country with so much surplus, why are there so many people who are still hungry? Even the United Nations has said that if we recover all of this food that's being wasted in the world, we will feed everyone who is food insecure 4 times over.
4 times over?
4 times over.
Well, so half of the food going unused and people starving.
Yes. So it's a disconnect. It's not that we don't have enough food. There's a disconnect in distribution.
What then did you do to help solve that problem?
One of the things that I've always been interested in is logistics and supply chain. I did my graduate degree from Carnegie Mellon University. And in 2012, 2014, that was when the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world started coming to fore, where we were starting to use them. It was a model, basically, that was a transport system where the company that was coordinating all of the movement of this transport network owned 0 of these vehicles. At that time, without that technology, it wouldn't have been possible. So we took the same model, really, and we said, well, let's create technology that takes people's cars, our resources, our time, and coordinates all of that so that we can form this big transport network of food delivery drivers that can then transport surplus food from restaurants and grocery stores to NGOs and charities and nonprofits that serve people who are in poverty. The big difference is, we have the same app that all of these commercial delivery services have, but our drivers are all volunteers.
If I get on to take a cab, we did it from the airport, went on to the Uber app, and basically the message goes out, someone at the airport, someone responds, and they come. You do the same thing when you say surplus food at the convention center,
yes.
And all of the 412 food drivers
will see it.
And someone can say,
yep, I'll take that. It's exactly like that.
It's brilliant.
It's pretty amazing. And what's amazing about it is that when we were piloting it and trying to see if it would work, we only used social media. We would post these rescues on Twitter, on Facebook, and see if someone would take it, and they would. And at a certain point, we couldn't manage everyone on social media anymore. And so we did create this app and this platform called Food Rescue Hero and prove that it could move hundreds of thousands of pounds of food. And by the end of this year, we will be in 20 cities, and we just hit 70 million pounds of food redirected.
Wow. When we talked prior to the session, the connection between one is hunger, but the other is the global warming piece.
We all know the immediate effect of redirecting really good food from feeding landfills into feeding people. But cumulatively, food waste is the second largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions. And so cumulatively, we are also mitigating methane and carbon from going into the environment. So mitigating climate change at the same time. By redirecting this food and making sure it's consumed, it feeds people and it helps us take climate action each time.
What got you here? We're all at this conference.
Yeah.
And we all see the food and we wonder where it goes.
I know.
You saw the food and wondered where it went. And you created an ecosystem to solve the problem. How'd you get there?
How did I get there? Well, so my background is in consumer goods, and I worked for a company called Colgate-Palmolive for a long
Oh,
time.
we've heard of them.
And it's all about driving people to purchase something, right? It's to do something, to prefer your brand over others. And there was a whole practice on how you get to do that. Applying those same principles to food rescue, driving you and I to opt into the app and then actually take a rescue and actually do the rescue. There's a whole practice of that I'm fascinated with. It's building a movement. It's translating what we see as advertising or marketing and awareness building into something that is doing good. For me, to be honest, when I started, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. We had this idea, and I went to an NGO that works on food insecurity in our city. And I said, look, we've piloted this idea. It will work. Let's just build the technology that is similar to a technology that's already been proven. The only risk that we have here is that we're taking a bet that hundreds of thousands of people eventually will subscribe and drive. And I was told no. I was told no, it won't work. I really could not believe that. And I always tell people, when you see possibilities, you just can't unsee them. I couldn't go to sleep at night thinking, oh, I gave up on this. It's so clear that this will work. And hearing that no was really what pushed me to actually do it myself. So we got this group of people together. We started with a philanthropic community in Pittsburgh, pitched the idea and said, this is new, extremely risky. This is not how we intervene on hunger. For the last 50 years, we've had one model for hunger intervention. This is totally different, but invest, take a bet, and we'll show you that it will work. The philanthropic community in Pittsburgh is extremely strong and innovative and supportive and gave us enough support so that we could prove the metrics. And we did it. For example, to date in Pittsburgh alone, we have about 15,000 people who get push notifications on our app. We were just reached 20 million pounds of food. That 20 million pounds of food, what's interesting about it is it took us 5 years to reach 10 million and then 1 year to reach 20 million. So the exponential effect is extremely clear. And then in these other cities that we're in, which includes Vancouver and Canada, we just hit 70 million pounds of food. And all in all, throughout this network, over 250,000 trips have been taken. The numbers are there. And I think the number that I'm most proud of is that our volunteers only miss 1% of the rescues. And that means it's a 99% success rate, which is higher than some commercial food delivery services.
Wow. How do you decide how to expand? Because from Pittsburgh to Vancouver is not the next city over.
No, it's not the next city over. I know you're from Ohio. We're actually in Cleveland and we're in Cincinnati and we're trying to get into Columbus. We're also closer in Philly as well, and then Northern Virginia to the south. So we're close to our region, but we also are all over California, which just passed a law called SB 1383, which pretty much requires businesses to mitigate usable food from going to landfills. So we're going to expand even more in California, I foresee in the next year. And it's really all about word of mouth. Podcasts such as yours that raise awareness for us, someone out there is listening, and it's either an existing food recovery organization that's been doing it analog through Excel spreadsheets and texting and managing maybe 100 loyal volunteers. And I can tell them you can grow to 15,000 easily. Or an individual, just like the individuals that started the organizations in Vancouver and Northern Virginia, passionate individuals who said, I believe in this model, I'm going to start my own. And they just took it. Our platform, our technology platform is licensed to these other cities, and they license it and they grow it phenomenally. Vancouver, which started during the pandemic, just crossed the 500,000 pound mark of food recovered.
This sounds like a challenge to my city, Columbus, Ohio. If it's in Cleveland and Cincinnati.
Yes, it is in Cleveland and Cincinnati. That's right. Yeah.
So the capital city does not have this.
No, we've been trying to find a partner in Columbus.
So I will commit on air to help you find a partner in Columbus.
Great, Maureen. Thank you.
We'll see how effective I am.
Oh, great.
It sounds like it's fairly turnkey. So for anyone listening who's in Columbus, Ohio, or any place else that wants to do this, because you've talked about grassroots, this is an opportunity for people who don't know how to contribute to climate change, don't know how to contribute to hunger.
Yeah.
Beyond, I hand out McDonald's gift cards to homeless people occasionally.
Right.
That's not systemic. That's a one-time, one-off. I hope I run into somebody while I have a card in my hand.
Right.
This is a systemic option to feed them until other systems solve the cause.
Right. Yeah. So I always like this analogy of you come across a river and you see people drowning. They're coming from upstream. You do two things, right? You save the people who are drowning, help save them, but also try to figure out why they're falling from upstream at the same time. But you can't just leave the people who are drowning. So this solution is that we have to do something now. And we have many, many other organizations out there that are doing important work into getting to the root cause of all this. It's fairly turnkey. This technology platform that we've built is licensed to food rescue organizations all over the US and Canada. It's that simple. It's turnkey. It's what's called a SaaS model, software as a service. When you license it, it gets turned on for your organization. In Cincinnati, it's called Last Mile Food Rescue. In Cleveland, it's called Hunger Network Food Rescue. In Vancouver, it's Vancouver Food Runners. So it's all different names of the apps tailored to the organization in the city. And you could start in as little as 2 days.
Tell me about the economics. Does someone have to quit their job, start this?
Yes.
Because I would have to get grocery stores to sign up. Now, I assume the big Aldi's and Safeways or whatever brand probably have contacts in their home offices that manage this. Do you help with that also?
So we do have connections with some of the largest retailers. We do license only to nonprofits that are, you either establish your own or an existing nonprofit. So yes, it's either someone starts a new job, becomes an entrepreneur and starts a food rescue nonprofit, or it's already an existing food rescue nonprofit or a hunger organization that wants to incorporate food recovery into their programming.
Tell me the staffing model. So I have to hire people to do this.
Yeah.
This doesn't all magically happen.
And we have a formula that we give them for it as well. So it's, when I say turnkey, it's everything from the technology to the operations to the marketing. We give them a whole, it's almost a franchise model.
Okay.
So if you're starting out from zero, we really need at least 2 people. One person to recruit all of the food donors and the nonprofit distribution partners, and then one person to really do volunteer recruitment because it's a big job. And between those 2 people, kind of in the beginning, manage the platform itself, meaning, someone out there is managing the Uber platform, and when there's a problem, you call someone. That's how we started. We were 2 people. But pretty quickly, it will need to grow into 3 people, meaning you're going to have someone who's just managing what we call air traffic control or dispatch. The 2 people will be managing the donors and the nonprofits and charities, and then the volunteer recruitment. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, like I said, Vancouver started in July 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, and they started out with 2 women. And now they are a staff of 4. So a year and a half later, at 500,000 pounds a year that they've hit. Northern Virginia started out with a staff of 1, and they also have a staff of 4 and 5, and they're moving about 1 million pounds of food. So it's going to quickly grow from 2 to 4 in the span of 2 years.
What's the funding model? I get the social value, but who pays the salaries of those 2 to 4 people?
Yeah, so just like any nonprofit, we have a huge philanthropic community in all our cities. This is how nonprofits are funded and sustained, and this is no different from that. There are also food recovery models where the food recovery organization actually charges the food donors a service fee in the same way that waste management needs to get paid. But this time, instead of throwing it in the landfill, it's going to people in need. There's those 2 models. Some of them combine both of them, but it's a traditional, nonprofit funding model that these food rescue nonprofits have.
Is there a way to build the model to fund itself?
So there are food recovery organizations, like I said, that are charging the food donors a recovery fee, depending on the size and the frequency. And that model is sustainable. And there's commercial for-profit ventures that are like this, but usually they use trucks. But for this model, you can also do the same thing. For us as an organization, our technology is licensed. We do have a license fee, and we do have an ongoing monthly fee for the upkeep of the technology.
Which makes sense since you've already built it. it would not make sense for 1,000 other cities to go build the same thing.
Exactly. And the incremental cost of adding a city is not as big as creating another app for another city.
Brilliant. It just seems like such a robust ecosystem approach to solving climate, food insecurity. It probably gets to issues with, if I'm not having to pay for food, I can afford gas to take my kids to school.
Right. In Pittsburgh, we do a survey of our end users and recipients at the end of every 2 years, and we ask them how the food supports them. We use the USDA Food Insecurity Survey. And the Food Insecurity Survey, what a lot of people don't know, measure things like you just said, do you have to skip meals? Do you have to give a meal to someone else in your household? Do you have to not purchase something else, such as your prescription medicine, so you can eat? It's all of those facets of food insecurity that not many of us consider. We just think that it's the absence of food, but it's all of these other factors around it. And 90% of the people that receive this food that is redirected report improvements in food security. And this was an independent study done by a professor out of the University of Pittsburgh.
I'm just thinking of all of the elements tied to food security.
Yeah.
Kids have better learning outcomes when they go to school and they have a consistent diet.
Yeah, that's why there's a big advocacy for school breakfasts being free. If children go to school hungry, their chances the whole day are already challenged.
Yeah, and learning outcomes long-term impact incarceration rates. And
it's a whole vicious cycle.
So this really does then contribute to several facets within our social safety net.
It does. And I think one of the things that is not quite talked about enough is that one of the things when we talk about social services, we don't talk about it in the same way or approach it with the same philosophy that, and let's say, Amazon does when Amazon looks at me as a customer, right? So when Amazon or my grocery store wants to make sure that they get my share of my wallet, as they say, right? They actually target and make sure that they respond to whatever limits that I may have to accessing their service, right? So, Amazon has one-click ordering, next day delivery. I could get my food from Whole Foods within 2 hours. It's all about convenience. I don't have to get anywhere. But when we deliver social services, we don't think of the people who we are serving as customers.
And the dignity
Associated with it, but also how easy is it for them to actually get the support that they need? We see convenience as a privilege when it should be part of the right that we're giving them when we're trying to serve people who are experiencing poverty or food insecurity. So when we do things like deliver food to their doors, we give them the convenience that you and I have. And I barely have time. Once I change to grocery delivery, I only go to the grocery store when I actually want to or have a special thing I need that's not, I have to pick. But on a weekly basis, my groceries get delivered.
And so you just have a standard fulfill chart.
Yes, and it just saves me time and allows me to do other things, like maybe be with my children and help them with their homework, or do better, work a little bit more, or, something that would advance something in my life. But if you are poor and you have to ride 2 buses to a food pantry with your 2 kids, and the food pantry is maybe open only twice a week, how are you going to access that food? And you're going to carry big boxes and bags on the bus with kids under 5. It's extremely inconvenient. What most people tend to resort to is not accessing the food, even if it's available for them, or resorting to food that is unhealthy but cheap.
French fries.
Exactly, $1 of whatever it is. So, so then it's, again, we're perpetuating a cycle that is not helping people by not reaching them.
Say my local grocery store at the end of the night, every night, they pull out the stuff that is ready to spoil.
The way we say it is that it's close to its sell-by date, because, again, that's another cost of food waste. These dates that are on these packaging, there's no regulations for it. Only infant formula is regulated by the FDA. But these dates, sell by, use by, expiration, all of these, when a consumer sees them, because there is a date, they won't even look at what the
is it
preceding,
a sell by or a use by?
Yeah, they'll just not buy it. And I used to be the person who would reach in the back of the milk, and because I don't know why.
Because we want the freshest.
Exactly. So these are dates that are completely arbitrary. The food that we are getting from these grocery stores are top quality food. And we know that this food lasts in our homes So that's the kind of food that we recover.
At the end of the night, again, they call the whatever's close to its date, whatever we call that. They put it in boxes or something.
Yeah.
And they send it to you, which means you have to then break it into packages or delivery parcels, or how does that work?
So typically a grocery store would call at the end of the night, and usually in their receiving area or a back room, they put all of it. And our volunteer typically is scheduled every day. They know where to go. They grab the food, and then they bring it to a charity that then redistributes the food.
So would that be a food pantry?
It could be any charity. So we've gone beyond food pantries, and we did that much early on because food surplus happens at all times. So let's say there's a football game or, a Pirates game, and it ends at 9 p.m. Food pantries are closed. At that point, it was when we questioned, are we limited to food pantries? Can we partner with other nonprofits? The answer is yes. We just asked them, would you like some food to distribute to your customers? And every single time the answer is almost always yes. Our biggest partner in Pittsburgh is our housing authorities. At 9 p.m., we would deliver to a high-rise close to the stadium. Then they would distribute the food from their community room, store it maybe overnight, and then the next morning, everyone goes to the community room and kind of shops in there.
When you say the housing authority, it would be kind of low-cost housing.
Yes, public housing. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Right, so it gets to where people already live.
And even though there are different items each day or week.
Mm-hmm. But it's regular enough so that you might get some items today, but you'll know it's going to come again 2 days later, and you'll get some. And actually, within a few months of working with the city of Pittsburgh's housing authority, all emergency calls for food have stopped. And that has never happened before.
Really? And so if I live close to the Pittsburgh Stadium, I eat a lot of hot dogs and nachos then?
Well, we also make sure that each site gets a variety of donors. Okay. So they would get hot dogs and hamburgers on one day, and then they would get fruits and vegetables from the nearby grocery store on the other day. Okay. And if there's a farmer's market, that's even better. During this season, they'd get more of that. It's all different kinds.
Really exciting. I love seeing how people are creating solutions out of something that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And the other piece that just keeps coming back to my mind is, as human beings, we want to help.
Yes.
We want to do something good, and it actually builds our resilience. You've also created opportunities for people to get the boost of endorphins and serotonin and positive brain chemicals for helping. You're reducing stress on the community. You're helping people who have limited resources, feeding their children. It seems like a very holistic approach.
I would like to think that it is. One of the things that I read that has always stayed with me many, many years ago is this article on The Atlantic about a Harvard longitudinal study. It's called the Harvard Men's Study. And it's basically trying to identify, what factors in our lives, make us live longer. And one of them was altruism. So when you think if altruism makes us live longer, then we are genetically wired to do that because we are genetically wired to survive. And so, that was a really life-changing moment for me too. I don't remember when I read it. And then Stanford did a study on why people do or don't volunteer. And the factors are, they don't have time. So when you say, let's schedule a Saturday where we take 4 hours to clean up park or build something, it's almost unreachable for us to plan that much and plan that far ahead. But if you are able to provide, within your phone, which we all use, episodic moments and multiple opportunities a day, a week, a month, and you and I may only take one a month. I'm such an administrator nowadays that I barely take a rescue, but also I want to give other people the opportunity to do a rescue. If you have 20 minutes and we catch you at just the right time, then you can volunteer. The other factor that this study showed is that you don't see your impact right away. Sure, you cleaned the park, but you don't necessarily see all the children enjoying it afterwards. Mm-hmm. But first, when you take food, you see your car filled with food, you then think, what a moral problem this is. Look at how much food there is in my car, and this is food I would eat. And then when you go and deliver it to a nonprofit or a housing site, everyone's happy to see you and excited to dig in and see what you got that day. Like you said, the positive hormones that come, the endorphins and all of them, just come and then you want to do it again because you feel so good. So it's giving you time. It's giving you the impact right away and you understand it.
As we talked about, it is grassroots. So while someone is addressing policy issues and safety net issues and funding issues, we as individuals in our community can make an impact.
Yes. So, and policy can come in many different directions. When we talk about public safety nets, we're in Europe right now where we know there's a much stronger public safety net than where we're from. But also, legislation such as, what California just enacted into law, which is SB 1383, saying that, look, we have so much food. Why are we putting it in our landfills? Let's make it illegal for people to do that. And so that's at a policy level, which then gives birth to all of these nonprofits that then rescue food because then there's funding available. Businesses now pay for it and want it. So it's all of those working together.
What barriers have you faced?
The biggest barrier for us is really raising awareness fast enough. The second is we want legislation to catch up. So we're very excited about the precedent in California. New York has one too. It's less, I would say it has less teeth than the one in California. But hopefully the states follow these and enact the same laws. And once they do, then we will have more and more municipalities that are driving it, an easier adoption of this model.
What else do you want our listeners to know about 412 Food Rescue?
I think what I want your listeners to take from this is that I was not a nonprofit individual when I started this. This is the first technology company I've also run. There's a lot of things that are first for me. What was the big difference was that I just believed in it and I was completely passionate about it. And if you're listening to this and you say, I've always wanted to do this, because I get a lot of those, like, oh, I've always wished someone would do this, or I always hate, seeing food go to waste. I want to tell you that you're listening. You can start one in your city. You just reach out to us. It's, foodrescuehero.org, and we will help you through the process. And we hold people's hands throughout because we want you to be successful. Yeah, you can start one. If you know someone who runs a food pantry and may be interested, it's all about these networks and these relationships that, this podcast like this create.
So if I were to go to my local community foundation, I could also potentially raise the money.
Yes, and we help you do that as well because we've done this for so long, for almost 7 years now. We've gone to our partners' community foundations and helped them pitch the idea, and we show them the results and the impact. And that's not the hardest part. That's the easier part.
Okay, what's the harder part?
The harder part is deciding to do it. It's really committing yourself to, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do something about this. I've been thinking about this for a while.
And then it sounds like once someone makes that decision, you're there to walk them through each step of the way.
Oh, yeah. So we have the woman who started it with me from day one is still with us as well. And she has now transitioned into basically everyone's account success coach. And, we have an entire curriculum. We have a thing called Food Rescue University that people go through so that they learn the ropes. And it's also a community where everyone exchanges ideas when they have problems or questions. All of the community contribute to an answer. Yeah, we help each city that we have as partners succeed.
So is there anyone who's failed?
Oh.
Or struggled?
I would say you have to really get into the mindset of recruiting thousands of people. That is the hardest part. I said making the decision is the hardest part. After you make the decision, it's really the mindset. So this isn't like going to a food pantry and recruiting 10 people to pack boxes. Mm-hmm. And you may not see those 10 people again. This recruitment of volunteers is the same way that Uber recruits drivers. Mm-hmm. You always have to have more than you need.
So it's word of mouth.
We do a lot with social media. Thank God I have team members who are 20-year-olds and understand TikTok. So it's a lot about social media engagement. We do a lot of, podcasts like yours. We have a strong media initiative so that, we've been covered in the Washington Post and NPR, past companies. So raising awareness for it is key for us. Mm-hmm. When I say we have moved 70 million pounds of food and, our drivers have taken over 250,000 trips, we have barely paid anything for advertising. Almost zero. This is a highly organic, very, I hesitate to say viral. It's when someone experiences the joy of doing this, they can't help but tell their friends. Okay. Because it's so easy and so impactful personally.
If I were thinking about the holidays are coming and we would go get manicures or something together, now we could go volunteer to do a food rescue together.
Yes. And it's actually fun. It's a lot like Pokemon, my kids say, because you're trying to hunt for where, you see the grocery store. You have to kind of figure out where in the grocery store you have to go. I mean, it does give you instructions, just like you mentioned when you got to the Geneva airport. It tells you where to get the Uber, right? Parking for wherever it is.
Yeah, but since I don't know where that is, not very helpful.
Every airport is a little bit of a scavenger hunt trying to find the place where you can get your ride. But then when you get it, you feel, oh my God, thank God I'm here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get it.
Yeah, and then they'll get me to my hotel, and then I have to the next
Exactly. So if there's some problem solving involved, so it does use your brain in a different way. Although we do give, instructions. And then when you do see the person or the location, you're like, it's almost like a prize, right? It's like a scavenger hunt where you're like, oh, thank you. I found it. It's these boxes of food. And then you load it in your car. Then you get the next instruction for where to bring it to the nonprofit. You're really going on a mission. The two biggest driver, I would say, cohorts we have are early retirees. They've done their work and they want to give back, and this is their way of giving back. They do this on a weekly basis. They get to know the person at the grocery store. They get to know the person at the nonprofit. It becomes a little community they become part of. And then mothers, stay-at-home mothers with children under school age. And the children love it because it's like hunting for food. And then mommy puts it in the back and they're all like, what is this? It's like, oh, this is food and we're going to bring it to here. And it becomes not only a teaching moment, but the kids enjoy it themselves. And then on the weekends, we get everyone else, everyone who works 9 to 5, families doing it together.
As you say that, I was thinking of all the people who volunteer to hand out meals on Thanksgiving and things. They want their kids to see not everyone has what they have, but this is an opportunity to do it more
every single day. Yeah, I remember my friend once wrote an article and the title was Why You Shouldn't Volunteer During This Holiday Season.
And it was, you should volunteer all the time.
It's because, there's so many people who volunteer and then everyone disappears.
Yeah, until the next holiday season. Mm-hmm. Happy Easter.
That's right.
Let's now shift gears a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you found something that you're passionate about. What about listeners who have a different idea they're passionate about? What advice would you give them? Because it sounds like you have ultimately created a franchise. Say I have a different thing I'm passionate about. How would you advise me? How do you get started?
My biggest advice to someone who is trying to start something is tap people in their networks. If they don't know where to start, it's to tap people in their networks that may be able to lead them the right direction. This is where the importance of relationships come to fore. I'm sure every leadership interview you've done has, mentioned something about creating networks and relationships. And I cannot underscore that enough. I am not shy about asking. And I used to be. And we've all heard the adage that, if we don't ask, the default answer is no. And I've really taken that to heart. There is no ask that I won't make. Because, at least I have a 50% chance when I ask and a 0% chance when I don't. And those are very clear odds, right? So it's really all about, starting with your network and having one lead you to the other and to the other and to the other. If you're starting from scratch. I didn't start from scratch. I was always involved in the food world. That has been my passion. I was dabbling as a food writer prior for a few years. And so I had this network of people in the food industry in Pittsburgh, and I really harnessed that when I started this organization.
What skills as a leader has this helped you build? And what skills did you rely on that you already had?
It's not sure how strong, but I think one of the things that I really see as something that I value that I had in my previous work is really understanding what drives and motivates people and how best to get at that and how to communicate that so that you are reaching them at their core to the point where they're actually doing something. That's a skill I learned in consumer goods and take it to this day and value it. And it's really, what we call human-centered design, but it's been done for years and years, and it's really market research. Just do your research. Figure out who your people are. When I say it's early retirees and mothers, and then on the weekends it's families, we know how to communicate to an early retiree or the families or a mother, and so they understand us and they feel an affinity for food rescue, and then it drives them into action. So that's a skill that I brought to the table fairly clearly early on. And I think my previous bosses and that job for really setting the foundation for, I would say, 90% of the work. A lot of the things I learned along the way and still learning is really, how do you build a team? How do you build from zero? And how do you build it so that you're both addressing your needs now and then foreseeing your needs later, and putting people in place so that you're not always behind the 8 ball, which I'm not extremely successful at because we're growing so fast. Like I said, we took us 5 years to reach 10 million. It took us 1 year to reach 20. Because there's no precedent for what we're doing. It's really hard to find a formula and foresee well enough so that I'm not reacting all the time. I still find myself reacting. And then, respecting what everyone brings to the table in your team and giving them the trust to do their work. I am not a micromanager, but I am an extremely quantitative when I gauge success. So, we work on what's called OKRs. We set metrics at the beginning of the year. I agree with, my leadership team, and they agree with their team on it. And I basically at that point let them be. And we just periodically check. I'm there if they need me. But my perspective is, I hired you because of your talent. Now go and do your work. And I will be as non-interfering as you need me to be. And I'm there to help you solve problems.
What does the future look like? Do you look 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? Are you in every city in the world? That seems like, if this is scary right now, that's...
Yeah. So our goal, we always talk about, it's 100 cities by 2030. 2030 is not random. It's, when the SDGs are set to be achieved. And 100 cities is, really a nice round contribution to that. There's over 100 countries in the world, and hopefully we're in each one, at least in developed nations where there's clearly surplus, close to where the consumer is. We want to be in those cities. And if we achieve that, we will have recovered almost 400 billion tons of food. And the carbon impact is, equivalent to like 6,500 launches to the moon. It's just phenomenal to think about.
What if a large nonprofit came to you and said, we'll take you global?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Then that makes the mission propagate much faster. And we know that there's large nonprofits all over the world, way more resources than we do. And they do have the power to do that. And that would be the dream.
So it is to be in every country.
It is. It would be everywhere where there's surplus food. We're on track. We're at 20 cities this year. And if we keep, a 10-city clip every year, we'll achieve the 100.
I'm thinking 100 countries, not 100 cities. But that's easy for me to do because I'm not running it. How do you appeal to that international organization that will come in and say, we'll take you from 100 cities to 100 countries? What do you have to build?
I think we're building it right now. We're building, we have the metrics to prove that it is successful. It's really all about understanding culturally, how replicable is it? And that's a question I'm also still asking. So when we say 100 cities, it could be at least 50 cities in the United States, right? And every big city in each state. And we're already in 2 in Ohio, right? And 2 in Pennsylvania. So in the United States will be a big part of that. Canada, while it is international, it's really just our next door neighbor. And then, there's this mattering of developed nations in the Western Hemisphere that can do this too. Geneva is one of them. But one of the things that I think about is the culture of volunteering is a very North American thing. And I'm not quite sure how the models look in Europe, for instance. How do people give back in Europe? And that's something that I can't answer yet. I foresee, in the next couple of years, as we, are in a fairly easy, predictable trend in the US of going from, city to city, and that's something to look at. And each country in Europe is so different. What is volunteering like? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that yet. We've had inquiries from Qatar and, of course, India and, well, for countries like those where, again, it's either the culture of volunteering or the culture of philanthropy, right? So we don't know where the funding will come from to run these organizations. It's figuring those two things out.
The idea of reuse.
Right.
What's an output for one should be an input for another, not to a landfill.
Right.
This is a brilliant example.
Oh, absolutely.
To be included in the research of what does circular look like?
Yeah.
How do others leverage this kind of thinking to say, I see something that shouldn't go to waste.
Right.
And create the system so that it gets absorbed into the next part of the cycle, because it is a brilliant example of circular.
You're absolutely right. A lot of people don't know is, we talk about the carbon impact at the end of its life in landfills, but 20% of all the water and land that we use to grow food goes to food that's not eaten.
And as we're facing water shortages.
Exactly. In America, the seat of our production is a desert, just California.
Yeah, and with glaciers melting, that water supply will continue to be disrupted. This is a really poignant topic. So Leah, thank you. Thank you for all the brilliant work you're doing.
Thank you.
And hopefully to our listeners, this will inspire you to be one of Leah's 100 cities.
Yes, absolutely, with Columbus being in the near future.